Welcome to the Music Lounge, everyone. Happy Thursday when this goes live. So hope everyone's doing good. I want to mention a nostalgia music thought before we get going.
I'm doing fine, and I can't wait to hear what you're going to say, Andrew.
Well, I think every episode, 60, 70 episodes, I've brought back Oasis in every episode. But this past weekend, I went to See Here Now Festival, which was in Asbury Park. And UB40 was on the bill. Soul, these are bands that you really don't expect to keep going as artists and bringing back music. But, in terms of playing their hits, the crowd, new fans, old fans, just really having a good time with these artists that we, grew up with, fell in love with. And, Oasis coming back after 15 years, UB40 played a new song, which sounded incredible. Some other 90s bands from the UK coming back. I think there's just a big appetite for this.
I read an article yesterday that said that even though Oasis only did 5 dates, was it 5 dates or 5 cities in the US?
I think they did about 3 cities in the US, but
okay. So they said somehow they managed to make that the tour of the summer because the anticipation and the excitement around it was beyond any other tour that was out there this year.
Yeah, I think, if you want to make it big as a 90s band, you got to either break up or go on a 10-year,
or have a last name named Gallagher.
Yeah.
And today our guest is Tim Rosta, who is formerly SVP of Creative Marketing at MTV and currently does independent marketing and works with a lot of charities and is living his best life in Palm Springs. So welcome, Tim. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. The marketing I did was sometimes creative, but it was actually the integrated marketing department. So, I don't want the creative team to get upset. We were the advertiser guys.
How you doing, Tim? We haven't seen you in a long time, but me working with Paul de Benedettis in programming before I moved to the music team, we seem to spend a lot of time between your department and programming. So you were almost an extended part of the team.
Yeah, we did. You guys were indispensable to us. It was like, it was a different time, right? Even just like scheduling programming, right? Like who kind of even does that anymore, right? It's just a whole new world. It
just goes up. Yeah.
Just goes up. Just goes up.
So when we were talking before, we set a time to record, I found out that I guess I kind of knew, but you had reiterated to me that you had worked at LifeBeat before MTV. So what was your route to the music business, LifeBeat? And can you talk a little bit about what LifeBeat is and sort of how you started there and then moved to MTV?
Yeah. It was, it's funny. It's one of those careers that literally there was zero planning. It just all sort of happened. LifeBeat was the music industry's AIDS organization, and we launched it in 1992 at the Supper Club in New York. We had a press conference with Yoko Ono and Cyndi Lauper and Nona Hendrix from LaBelle. And we launched the organization. We announced that we were doing our first concert, which was the Pet Shop Boys and Salt and Pepper. LifeBeat was really born out of sort of the vision and the sort of need. Bob Caviano was Grace Jones's manager. Mm-hmm. He discovered he had HIV and AIDS, and he wrote an editorial in Billboard and said, I can't be the only one. Broadway has responded with Broadway Cares and DIFA in the design industry. And, where's the music business? Where are you guys? So we launched the organization. We got tremendous early support from record labels and managers. And then unfortunately, Bob, we had the concert at Roseland, with Pet Shop Boys and Salt and Pepper. And a couple days later, if not a week or so, Bob passed away. And, I was really just there to help. I was an organizational development guy, not really working in the music business. I had no understanding what I was about to sort of have to deal with. Sort of ignorance was bliss. So I was like, all right, I'm here. I got to do it. I've got to step up. And so I became the executive director, and I ran the organization for 10 years. So our goal was to reach young people with, an HIV prevention message. Sort of, I always used to say, you take an important message, you wrap it in a little pop culture, and you deliver it in a way that young people get it, can access it. So that's what we were doing. And early on, John Sykes was on our board. He was over at EMI in music publishing, and then he became the president of VH1. And so early on, we had a lot of relationship with VH1. We did a series there called The Beat Goes On, and we had lots of VH1 artists. I mean, it was, Seal and Gloria Stefan and Dave Matthews Band and Chris Isaac. I mean, we did, I think, 3 or 4 of those shows on VH1. But at MTV, I really, sort of had challenges getting to them. And I knew that if we wanted to reach the audience we wanted to reach, we needed MTV and we needed them to amplify our message. So I actually had an intern take a helium balloon with a string on it, with a note, over to Judy McGrath's office. And it said, I need your help, Tim Rosta, LifeBeat. And Kathleen, her assistant, called me that afternoon and said, Judy wants to have breakfast with you tomorrow. And I had breakfast with her. She said, what can I do? And I said, it would mean a lot if you joined the board. And she said, consider it done. We kind of lived a parallel life with MTV. They were at all of our events. We did World AIDS Day specials on MTV. We did many, many concerts. We did when Eazy-E passed away. We did it at Madison Square Garden with Notorious B.I.G., Wu-Tang, and Mary, Jay Blige, Jodeci. I mean, it was a huge lineup. And I was way in over my head, but, ignorance is bliss.
You had
so I got
the support, yeah. So you didn't get the intro from John Sykes. Was he at VH1 when you decided to go to MTV? I mean,
I
to reach out to MTV.
Yeah, I can't remember, Andrew. I think he was. It's interesting. One of the earliest relationships that I had with MTV was through Rod Asa. Rod Asa, who we all know had a tremendous career in programming, and no one spotted talent like Rod. Rod was a LifeBeat volunteer before he was at MTV.
Wow.
And so once he went to MTV, all of our events, Kennedy would show up, Ananda. I mean, we had all of the VJs were helping us and showing up at our events. So I'm not exactly sure if Sykes was at VH1 then. I'm not sure. I can't remember. But then Judy was the first one that joined the board. Then Van Toffler joined the board. John Shea joined the board. So we just had this really intimate relationship with MTV for all of our events. And I knew lots of players there and lots of people. And one day, Shay, it was 10 years in that I was at LifeBeat. He said to me, I'm looking for a VP of trade marketing over at MTV. And I remember saying, what about Peggy, our friend over at so-and-so? He's like, yeah, she's great, but I really need somebody that sort of does what you do and gets events underwritten and sponsors and relationships. You've done all that work with Levi's and Vans, and maybe you can do that over here. And I was like, oh, all right, I'll try. I was ready to leave MTV. I mean, LifeBeat. I mean, it'd been 10 years, so I gave it a shot, and that's how I ended up there.
And then MTV still continued to work with LifeBeat, so it must have been easy for you to kind of be the on the other side now working. How was that to work alongside LifeBeat on the MTV side?
Yeah, it's interesting. I'll tell you, it is so much easier to get people to pony up money when you're sitting in the senior vice president of integrated marketing seat at MTV than when you're sitting in the executive director seat at LifeBeat. You really didn't have much to trade. Interestingly enough, John Kennelly, who was the sort of very powerful head of music at MTV through sort of early LifeBeat years, he ended up going to LifeBeat and becoming the executive director after I left.
Okay.
So there was just always this relationship where we kind of helped each other. But it was a lot easier to get $100,000 when I was at MTV for LifeBeat than it was when I was at LifeBeat. Trust me.
I would have to imagine in the very early days of LifeBeat, there may have been some, I don't want to say pushback, but some hesitation with certain artists or managers to embrace the cause. How did you get around that? Or was it just that you just kept working and working the calls and, trying to get them to understand how important it was?
You know what's interesting though? We launched LifeBeat in 1992. We were well into the AIDS crisis. You know, there were very few artists that, I mean, honestly, there were very few artists that ever said no to us. And so,
Mhm.
you know, I used to get people say, oh, this one or that one, you know, they're a douchebag or an ass. I mean, I don't know. You know, when I get them, they're always trying to do something nice. You know,
Yeah,
I was a huge supporter of Puffy's because anytime we asked him to do something, he said yes. And he
Great.
always did. And, you know, so I kind of got them on their best behavior, but very few. I mean, you know, I won't name names, but I could, you know, one hand the people that said no. I mean, honestly, people were really, really receptive and really helpful. And it kind of just mattered how you asked them, when you asked them, and who asked them. You know,
right.
when I
Right.
was at LifeBeat, it would never be me asking, and I always get one of our powerful board members to ask them, and they'd say yes.
Yeah. And you wanted to go after that level of artists because one, they had the biggest reach, they were tapped into the youth, which was, you know, aligning with what you did. So you instantly had this powerhouse of A-level artists. When you went to that next artist, you already had, well, if so and so's doing it, I'm not going to say no.
It also just it mattered. Like I think a lot of organizations, like, you know, the sort of powerful AIDS organizations at the time, you know, they really didn't have the sort of inside look that we had into artists. Like we knew when an album was coming, we knew when somebody was performance ready. We knew, you know, so if you asked somebody who wasn't I mean, I asked Katie Lang once to do something at the Garden, and she was scared to death of the Garden. She just wasn't performance ready. We moved it to the Beacon. She said yes, you know, so it
And it's
just
good to have that
depended on,
insight. Yeah.
and so we kind of knew that stuff and we could sort of see that stuff, and I think that's why we were pretty successful at getting people to do things. I mean, and then you know, we asked artists to do some things. Some artists didn't want publicity for what they were doing, not that they were shying away from it, like Beyonce went into hospital AIDS units and visited patients and sang in hospital AIDS units, and no press, nothing. But she, you know, they always said yes. They always said yes.
It's amazing, you know, and it just goes to show the power of both what your message was, as well as the ability to get people on the board who were able to access that level of talent for you.
The music business can be very much a business of, like, you know, favors, and you scratch my back and I scratch yours. And, you
Yeah.
know, I want, you know, it's like you can have this artist from the label, but you also got to have this baby artist. And
Right,
you got to
right.
We
keep
know how
on.
that works.
Yeah, you know, so there was a lot of that going on. And so, you know, not only was it important that they had the access, but it was important that they were willing to use favors on
Hmm.
behalf of LifeBeat. And they were. So, you know, I have nothing but good things to say about everybody we worked with at that point, except for maybe Sandra Bernhard. But, you know, other than that, they're all
SVP
good.
of Integrated Marketing at MTV is a pretty powerful title. And if you look at any high level piece of programming, whether it's a show or a tempo event, it's always brought to you by, or this segment is brought to you by so and so. So, can you explain? Obviously, there's a money factor, and you've got two powerful brands that want to reach that same audience. How did you decide, you know,
Like, how did it all
to
work?
book Pepsi as a VMA sponsor?
Well, you know, interesting, to be a VMA sponsor, to have any relationship to the Video Music Awards, the advertiser had to spend a minimum of $20 million. So if you didn't, you weren't even invited to have a unit in the show. When it came to the VMAs, we were working with sort of the biggest, you know, they were the Verizon, the GM, the Procter and Gamble, you know, those really big advertisers. You know, a lot of times it was the advertiser would come to us and they always wanted a relationship with talent. We always made it clear, like, we couldn't do that. You know, we could provide a relationship with the programming, but that would get us into trouble sometimes. But, you know, the way integrated marketing really worked for us is I always set our team at sort of one foot in commerce and one foot in creative, because we had to sort of come up with solution for the advertiser's marketing problems, right? TV's DNA. I joined in 2000. Sometime around that time, there was such a penetration of DVRs in the marketplace. And television had done a really good job of releasing brands from content, right? They opened the door to the refrigerator on the Brady Bunch, it might say milk, soda, but there were no brands, right? And once people started recording shows, they were skipping.
Right.
The advertisers thing shifted. They were like, we need to be involved in the content so that they can see us. And so we really had the task of, in some ways, repopulating TV with brands. And we had to do it in a way that was organic and it made sense. We used to get crazy requests for shit. I can't tell you how many times Burger King wanted Burger King to walk the red carpet at the movie awards. It was always a no. It was like, that doesn't make any sense. Putting a PlayStation in Run's house for him to play with his kids made a lot of sense. And they'd sort of pick it up organically. And all of a sudden, that was a part of the programming. There were other shows where it was super easy to do integrations. Pimp My Ride was a bonanza. That sort of auto aftermarket was huge for our audience, and advertisers wanted to be in it. I put an Xbox in, I think, Tony Hawk's truck, and that was part of a much larger deal because later that year we revealed the Xbox 360 and an original piece of programming MTV did and broadcast out globally. A lot of those deals, you'd see like an integration that would happen in a show, but it was part of a year-long.
So when you were brainstorming for that content, if there was some kind of creative programming team, or was it part of your team, or were you just bringing the sponsors in and then maybe someone on development was helping you come up with the creative?
Well, I would say probably 2 or 3 years into me being there, integrated marketing became the lead horse in the conversation with the advertisers around the upfront. It used to be that the sales team would just do a deal and then they'd say, all right, what are we going to do for Pepsi? And that was sort of the beginning, but things became I was one of 6 people when I joined that team. When I left, I think I had 62 people reporting to me. So we were probably one of the more advanced integrated marketing teams in television. And, because you couldn't launch a product to a youth audience without having MTV involved. So,
right.
We were sort of the go-to for a lot of brands, but we would never promise an advertiser we would do something without first having cleared that with programming. So we would go to the programming people, we would maybe have an idea, we'd sit with the advertiser, we'd ask them what they wanted to accomplish, and we'd have some ideas. We'd go back to programming, we'd say, can you do this? Will you do that? Does this work? And then we'd take it to the advertiser. But it was never us just sort of saying, hey, we want you to do Band in the Bubble.
I remember Band in the Bubble. Cartel.
You do?
Yeah.
Oh my God, that's hilarious. I had to look them up the other day. So I'll tell you about how that came about. It was literally, I always said, if it starts wrong, it stays wrong, right? And that literally, I remember walking that meeting, it was Dr. Pepper. Sorry, Dr. Pepper, but you're not paying my bills anymore. But I walked into the meeting. I remember even where it was. We were in 25 Large. And the guy from Dr. Pepper, I was like, a little chit chat at the beginning. And he lets me know that he's the guy that had figured out how to get Dr. Pepper from the second to bottom shelf in, I don't know, Kroger's to the second to top shelf. And that was, then he became the head of marketing there. And I was like, oh, okay, well, congratulations. It's wonderful. And I'm thinking, we are so fucked. Like, this guy was about to pitch me an idea. And I was like, I can't wait to hear this. So the idea, they had done it in Australia with a bigger band than I think Cartel. Cartel's still around. They were a decent band, Their idea was that we construct this bubble in Times Square, 23 cameras, because I think there were 23 flavors in Dr. Pepper. And that U2, the biggest band in the world at the time, go in there for a month. And the only thing you couldn't see was the bathrooms, but everybody could see everything else. You could
Sounds
watch,
like a
Bono.
David Blaine stunt.
Yeah, exactly. You could watch Bono sleep, and it's like they literally were like, well, no, we think you should ask U2 to do it. And we're like, And we came back with Cartel, and we did it down on the West Side Highway. But that literally might have been the worst thing we ever did. I hated that.
I tell you why I remember it, because most of it aired on MTV.com. In fact, I think there was a live stream on MTV.com, and I had to send Lisa Lauricella down there every day to just sort of make sure the band was okay and everything was going well. And
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I really am. It's not my proudest, not my best work.
I
But it's memorable, right?
Listen, sometimes these
a good case
advertisers would
study.
be waving, they'd be waving like $5-10 million at you, and it's like you got to figure it out.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
literally have to figure out a way to do something and sort of sell it into them.
And it's funny, you mentioned earlier how brands had to work with MTV to reach that audience. And we're always talking about how labels had to work with MTV for their newer developing artists to reach that audience too. It was the one place culturally that everybody had to be a part of to reach that youth audience at that time.
Yeah, it was. And I think we did end up working with a lot of artists over time, and a lot, music and talent had so many mouths to sort of feed there, right? And we were tended to be sort of low man on the totem pole sometimes. And so, but sometimes you get lucky. Like I remember, I think it probably was around 2005 or so, wanted an artist to perform at an event they were doing at a mall in Dallas. It's like, all right. So, I went to music and I said, who you got? And they were like, well, we have this new artist, and she just, had a single out, Palm to Replay. And would you be interested in Rihanna? And I was like, sure, so I'll sell it in. And they were like, never heard of her, and I was like, all right. But music says she's going to be the next big thing, and they were like, all right, bring her down. And I just remember being there with her in that mall. That girl, she couldn't have been more than 18 or 19 years old, I think, at the time. And she had to change in the J.C. Penney dressing room. I just remember sort of noticing how she walked down that aisle in the J.C. Penney like it was a Paris runway. I was like, this girl's a star. Like you could tell from the minute. Then she became enormous. And to be honest, that was a huge, huge, huge benefit to me in my relationship with J.C. Penney, because then I ended up doing some really cool work with them, live commercials in the VMAs, and really cool stuff with them because they trusted us. I turned out Gaga for a thing once because I was like, never heard of her.
Well, so the Rihanna story, I also did all the music programming for Logo, and they needed somebody for something. I can't remember. And Amy Weigler was there at the time. I don't know if you know Amy. And she always reminds me that I pitched them Rihanna and they said no.
Sorry, I said yes. I said no to Gaga, but I said yes to Rihanna.
Logo had Gaga on their first New Now Next award, so I guess it's an even split there. But did you also ever have something happen where you had to change plans last minute to accommodate a sponsor because something sort of happened outside of your control?
Well, yeah, constantly. You were always going back, and something changed, and you had to repitch, and that happened a lot. The VMAs were always a challenge. I think people forget that Katrina came through Miami before it hit New Orleans, and we were doing the VMAs there. And I remember we were doing lots of work in the pre-show. I think it was Pontiac, and I was doing some live commercials. Well, we weren't going to do those anymore because there was a hurricane outside. So I pulled the car inside the venue, and Kathy Flynn was so mad at me. And I was like, fuck it, let's go. Like, we got to shoot this, And so, there were moments like that. I mean, there were also just things that, were beyond your control. I think it was probably 2003 or so. We were at Radio City for the VMAs, and I was sitting there in the audience, and the first award of the night, it's the best hip hop artist or something, I believe. And I think it was the first award. It was very early in the show, and it was LeBron James. And LeBron was just brand, he was young, he was a baby, he had just signed, his NBA, he was the #1 draft choice, and he was a big deal. And he walks out with Ashanti, and there to present the first award, and she's holding something. I'm kind of watching, and she takes a drink and she says, "Oh, hey, LeBron, I thought, you might like a Sprite. I know you just signed a big deal with Sprite. And I brought you a Sprite." And she hands him a Sprite. And he said, "Oh," and he, Sprite. He says it like 2 or 3 times. And I'm sitting there now. I said, fuck, because Pepsi was the sponsor of the show. So
Right.
just sitting there, and I was like, all right, well, I'm like, we'll fix it. And, we'll fix it in the reruns. It's live, it's over, it's done, it's out there. And all of a sudden, scurrying down the aisle is Jason LaBeach, who Jason was, the wonderful vice president of my team, and he's like, "Did you just see that?" And I was like, "Yeah, it's all right. What can we do? It's over." And he's like, "No, you don't understand." He's like, "I got in a big fight with the Pepsi people this afternoon because they wanted her to come out on the stage with a Pepsi in rehearsals. We stopped them, and we told them they couldn't." And I was like, okay, so all of a sudden I was like, I guess I gotta get up. So I get up and I go back. My friend Susan, I was like, I'll be back. Never came back. But I gotta go. All the advertisers were up in the loge, and there is a shouting match going on between the Pepsi's ad agency people, the guy who had done the deal with Beyonce, who I think was an outside player, and they're screaming, and now they start screaming at me, and they're screaming at Doug Rohr, who was the head of sales, and I was like, all right, so we go to the truck, and I was like, I literally held the line. I was like, there's no product placements in the VMAs. It's not happening. We're not doing it. They're like, she's coming out with the Pepsi. And I was like, she's not. And so, I literally end up barricading the door to her, to backstage. The Pepsi guy had his finger in my chest, and he was like, she's got the Pepsi. And I was like, she's not. She didn't. But we had to bump out of the logo, the Pepsi logo, another time in the show, which became institutionalized. They got that then moving forward every time they did it. But there were always things that you couldn't control, right? You're dealing with artists, you're dealing with live shows. It happens,
But the fact that you were able to go back and get a visual for Pepsi during a live show is pretty cool.
Wow, that's me and Doug Rohr in the
That's
truck.
What I'm saying.
Literally, the Rolex sitting there, Van's there, and Van's like, I know. And I was like,
keep the camera on the logo. 5 more seconds.
Fix it. I think it was his idea. He's like, we'll bump out of the logo. We had built a big logo at the skating rink because they were doing the best new artist performances out there.
Gotcha.
So we did a bump out. But, there was, you just had to go with it. You had to just.
Well, that's the thing, too. It is, you can plan and plan and plan, but you still have to think on your feet, too.
Yeah, it's true. What was interesting, too, about my team, I think a lot of them gone on to be very successful and doing a lot of different things and at other networks and other, I'm very proud of a lot of the people that I had the chance to work with. But, they really did have to think with both sides of their brains, the creative side and the business side. And I think it served them well. Sometimes, I'd go and sit down with the music or the programming people and, y'all look at me like, all right, you're fronting for the ad sales team. And then I'd sit down with the ad sales team and they'd be like, all right, you're fronting for the programming and the music teams, So we were sort of neither fish nor fowl. We always just had to move the ball forward.
I'm going to throw you a couple quick fire questions.
Oh, no.
What was your first concert?
Andrew, that's not fair. I'm old, so it's like...
We've had some random answers over the episode.
Well, I grew up in a little town in Ohio called Zanesville, so we weren't exactly on the concert circuit, right? There was never anything going through there. So it wasn't until I went to Ohio State and went to college that I really saw my first big concert. And it was because my roommate was in charge of security for the concerts. And so he literally got me a job sitting down in front back when you really didn't have to do much. And the first concert was Heart. Okay. And I remember being right there in the front and hearing, sort of hearing them perform and sing. And I was like, shit, what have I been missing? Growing up in Zanesville, I missed all this, but it was Heart.
A great one.
Loudest concert I ever went to was Heart.
And they
You as
were, I
well?
mean, but you didn't mind. They were amazing, right?
No, but I never had heard anything that loud in my life. And I'd been to a few concerts before that, but that was incredible.
Yeah, they were great.
I'm a
Ann
big
and
fan.
Nancy.
Yeah. The first industry job I had was a PR firm, and they represented Heart as well. So I never got to see them live, but
It's not too
I can
late.
say that. I know.
They're
I
still
know.
alive.
They're
Yeah.
still touring. Yep.
They are.
Do you have a favorite artist now?
Do I have a favorite artist now?
Or it could be a nostalgia artist that you brought back to the Tim Rosta
I mean,
Spotify
listen,
playlist.
I like, I do I have a favorite? I mean, I went to Coachella this year because I'm out here, in the
Okay.
Coachella Valley. And, I happen to love Charlie XCX. I
Oh
happen
wow.
to, like,
Yeah.
I really, the Gaga show blew me away. I mean, it literally was one of the best live shows I've ever seen.
Mm-hmm.
I think she just sort of reemerged as, one of the biggest rock, stars in the world after that. So I love that. But, I'm one of these people. I'm working on an event out here with, Orville Peck, and, I just like dipping into a lot of stuff. So I've always been, I was lucky during those LifeBeat years. I got to literally, I mean, I
Mm-hmm.
had sort of carte blanche entree to like Irving Plaza and Roseland, and it kind of wasn't anything I didn't see at that
Yeah.
point. So I'm a little spoiled.
And for all of us too, it was amazing the amount of live music we were able to see at that time, usually for free because we were guests of a label or manager.
Yeah.
And I mean, to the point where I was like probably turning down things I did want to see just because I was like, I can't go out again another night this week,
Yeah.
I know
Or
these are some high
two
class
shows in
problems
one
I have to
night is
say.
is
right?
the max I can do. And that was before we really had to think about going to Brooklyn. Like these were just in the city, which was a lot easier back then. Now it would be pick one and we're done, But we used to go to a few a night.
Yeah. Listen, I was literally probably out at the clubs 5 nights a week.
Yeah. Yeah.
It shows.
I love asking this
Oh no.
question. Do you have a piece of MTV swag that you've kept over the years? A
I
favorite
mean, I
piece
do.
of
I have a few things, but like when you say swag, for me,
memorabilia?
it was creating a lot of that shit. Like we were doing a lot of this stuff. It was for advertisers, so we were creating a lot of swag for advertisers. I have. Do you remember there used to be in the hallways? It was it said MTV Plaza, Rudolph Giuliani Mayor. It was the street sign from down in Times Square, and it used to be
Mm-hmm.
kicking around the hallways. Somehow, when I moved out of MTV's offices, it ended up in my stuff. So I have that in my guest house here. I have the original. I sent a thing with the Osbournes, a picture that they all signed, and I sent copies of it to the advertisers. I have the original from it.
That's how I
Yeah,
got one.
do you
Is it
what?
this one? Hold on.
No, yes, yes. Well, I have the original one.
It's
That's
signed.
it.
It's signed.
I have
Maybe
the
I
original
took
one.
this from Paul's office.
Yeah, you should have. There, he probably didn't need that. I mean, Paul had lots of things.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, no, I have lots of little things like that, but little concert posters and things. Yeah, I have lots of stuff. I have lots.
At your time working at MTV, did you have a favorite music video or that you liked or you thought was worthy of the
God,
support
I
that we were
think
giving?
again, I'm thinking about, sort of just Coachella and being there and seeing Missy Elliott and just Missy. I mean, Missy just brought it every time in her videos, and visually she was just incredible. So I think I loved all of Missy stuff. That for me, I love Missy Elliott's videos. I mean, she was amazing.
When Diane Van Horn was on, who was the label rep, and we were talking about the Missy videos, she was saying Missy was very shy and she didn't want to be herself on stage or on screen. So that's, I think, what helped her create all these really unique visuals, because it helped. I mean, it was her, but it wasn't her, if you know what I mean.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's interesting. I can see that. I mean, it was always like, she was always dressed in some costume and, sort of playing some character. So, but it worked. She was
Yeah,
brilliant.
they
I
were
think
amazing.
sometimes when you wear a costume or you kind of change into your alter ego, that's where you probably become comfortable and you can come out of your comfort zone, kind of
Yeah, I
helps you
think you're
put on your
probably
back cape.
right. I mean, I think you're probably right. But boy, she's still doing it, man. It's
Yeah.
she's still making it happen. I love it.
Yeah. Um, so we've talked about the VMAs and sponsors. Was there any idea that came from a sponsor that they were so adamant about doing that you were like, this is just crazy, but you ended up making it work with the requests coming in? Obviously,
Well,
they
not
wanted the Burger King man to walk the red carpet, which never happened.
Yeah, you're welcome. No, there were literally lots of times we had to push back. I think one of the worst things would be when you would see somebody from, a brand that started talking to you as if they were like a music producer. And you'd be like, oh God, here we go. There's going to be this guy's living his best life now. He's at MTV and he's going to pitch us a crazy idea. But, generally you could make it work. I mean, I was so lucky to be able to work with the promo team a lot. They produced a lot of our content and they were so creative and so smart. Lee Jeans had a little spokes guy. His name was Buddy Lee. I don't know if I
I
mean,
do. I remember that.
and Buddy had like a little hat and he was a little cowboy. But the thing is, so they wanted to have a relationship to MTV too. And I said, great. So I took him to the promo guys. Their sort of instinct was like very punked, right? It was very like, let's burn him. Let's kick him like he's a football. Let's, like this. And I literally took the first ideas back and the like, jeans people were like, oh, you can't
No.
burn Buddy Lee. Like, you can't do any of that. And I was like, all right, tell me the parameters around what Buddy will and won't do. Well, he didn't talk, so he had no voice. He didn't move. He wasn't animated. There was nothing. He was basically a little doll. And they came up with the funniest ideas. They put him in like a series of like telenovelas, and it was like there was a woman like she's beautiful and she was like, oh my god, like you're leaving me, and she's screaming and the chair turns around and his buddy sitting in there, and then they were funny and the advertiser loved them. I always used to say to those guys, there's always a creative solution, right? You can always find a way.
Yeah.
I was really privileged to work with a lot of people that, I mean, there were a couple times I had to say, it's not film school, guys. We're here to make some money.
Depending
Yeah,
on
there
what
were.
year that was, and if the two-headed dog was around, you could have had Buddy ride the dog like a horse.
Yeah, I don't think he was there
Could have
yet. The
put him on the
two-headed
back
dog.
of the
Maybe he was. I
two-headed
don't
dog.
remember. They loved it though. They were really happy with it. A lot of that sort of business was just you maintain a relationship with maybe somebody was at a brand, but then they'd end up being at an agency later, and then they'd end up being at a different brand or a different agency. So you just had to keep those relationships going.
Well, the other flip side of that is there probably are people at other places who would have said, MTV2 and Lee Jeans just do not go together. We don't want to be in business with you. I mean, it dilutes what our brand is. And MTV2 is so forward thinking. They were like, we can make anything work. We can do something with this. And that was what set you guys apart from, I think, what everybody else was doing in the integrated marketing space.
Yeah, I think we would just sort of say, all right, let's come at it from a different angle. As long as you started and ended with the audience and sort of said, is this some value to our audience? Will this be entertaining to our audience? You kind of couldn't lose, right? It's like Shay, my boss, used to say, if you can see the deal behind the content, it stops the action and it takes them out of the moment.
Wow.
And that's what we don't want to do, right? It had to sort of enhance the experience. It had to feel organic to the experience. It had to feel like something, yeah, that makes sense there. There were times we turned down money because things didn't make sense. I mean, I remember we would do the 12 Days of Christmas on TRL, and sales came to me and they had $1 million attached to me integrating some sort of toy they wanted the audience to play with. And I was like, it says on the package, this is for 6 to 8 year olds. It's not going to work. There were times we would say no to money. So there were times when we said it's not a match. It doesn't fit and we're not going to do it. But generally, we had enough creative brain power between my team, your teams, that we could figure it out.
Yeah.
Make it fun.
Did you watch this year's VMAs?
I did.
And do you always look at it from an integrated marketing exec, like, oh, that really didn't go, or, oh, I would have rather have seen X?
Yeah, I do. And there are times when I mean, throughout the years, I thought they did a great job. And, I think it's because Jesse and Van are back at the helm. So I actually kind of loved it. I thought it was really strong. And George Cheeks is over there at CBS.
I think he got a camera shot at the Emmys, right? Did you watch the Emmys?
Yeah, he always does. Yeah, he always does. George.
That's the first time I noticed it.
One year, George and I we went to the VMAs together, and I had done a deal with General Motors. And I was like, let's get, they were really moving towards, sort of alternate fuel vehicles. And I was like, let's have some alternate fuel vehicles. They were ethanol vehicles. Bring the stars to the red carpet. We'll talk about it. It'll be a great impression. Christina Norman and Sean Moran and I flew to Detroit. We met with them. They loved the idea. They're like, we'll supply you the fleet of vehicles. Only problem was there was no gas station in Manhattan that carried ethanol. And they were like, we'll work that out. We'll work it out. I said, great. Well, show comes around. Still don't have still no way to fuel them. We had a contract with the city of New York to have some of their snow and removing vehicles that had refueling trucks have ethanol in them, and that's how we fueled the cars. I think we had 6 or 8 cars from them, and maybe more. And I want to say 6 to 7 of them broke down during the VMAs. Wow. And George and I sat in front of Roseland Ballroom in a broken down car for like an hour until they sent somebody to get the car.
You have someone at the back that isn't on camera pushing it along the red carpet.
But it was a good idea, but it's always the execution. It's always the execution.
So after you left MTV, you went to OWN and then you went to E. When you were at E, did you ever get to work with the Kardashians? And did you get to meet them? And were there any other fun experiences that you had at E?
Oh God, I had a lot of fun at E. I mean, E was fun because we sort of owned the red carpet, and the red carpet stuff was like 3 hours of programming. When I first got there, I remember it was like the Glam Cam 360 brought to you by Jeep. The Glam Cam 360 brought to you by, Microsoft. And I was like, this doesn't make any sense. Like, we're going to have to take a look at this. Like, the first weekend I got to E, I was at the Golden Globes, and the president of the network, whom I had just interviewed with, and I literally just moved to LA, came up to me and said, we just had to skip an interview with Jennifer Lopez on the red carpet because we needed to get another mention in for, I think it was Jeep. And she's like, that's never happening again. I was like, okay, no problem. And so, it gave me permission to sort of work with them and do much more creative things on the carpet and more creative content. And coming from MTV, it was sort of a no-brainer. We were far ahead of the game. So that was fun. To answer your question directly, everybody wants to know if you worked with the Kardashians. Yes, of course, because I produced the upfronts for MTV, I produced the upfronts for E, so they were our biggest talent. But sort of counterintuitively, advertisers didn't want much to do with the Kardashians. Well, think about it. You crest white strips and you do a commercial, and then the next thing you know, Kim's looking at her butt in the mirror. You know what I mean? They were kind of like, yeah, that's not working for us. So interestingly enough, they literally kind of steered clear of the Kardashians, except when I would do like advertiser parties. Like I did a party with them out in the Hamptons once, and they loved rubbing elbows with them, but they weren't
Hmm.
the draw. They were amazing. They were wonderful. They were all business. Mama was all business. I mean, I have tremendous respect for her as a talent manager. But they were a pleasure to work with. They were real pros. I mean, I never had a bad moment with them. I was I brought E to the tents for Fashion Week, and we did a big deal with Unilever to set up a big studio there. And I mean, this isn't a fun story, but it goes back to the sort of like there's nothing you can do when shit happens. We literally, we were doing the fashion police there, which was Kelly Osbourne and Joan Rivers, and the day before Joan went under the knife and died in surgery. And it was one of these moments where we were all like, it was such a tragedy because first of all, it was Joan and
Yeah.
everybody loved. I mean, that woman was incredible. Like she flew, I think, to Los Angeles on the same flight every week. She would come in. She was there for 2 or 3 days. She would shoot maybe 4 shows. She was just everybody loved her. She was a pleasure to work with. Again, it's like you're working in live television, you're working with talent, sort of anything can happen. But E was fun. I had a good time at E. I mean, it was fun. Owen was fun too. I went there with Christina. I literally was, I'd left MTV. I was, sort of tooling around. I went to France. I went to Africa for a while, and I think I was on the Cape, and she calls and she's like, I'm over at OWN. I was like, yeah, yeah. And she's like, and we just signed a $43 million deal with Procter and Gamble. And I don't think there's anybody here who's prepared to manage that. Would you come and help? I was like, sure. I know them all very well. I had a good time. And, Vanessa Moore, who was, she was at MTV. She went with me
I remember
to
Vanessa.
OWN and
Yeah.
yeah.
So
So yeah,
when you
I've had a
left
great experience.
when you left MTV, maybe it was a bit of a fun house. You were, putting things together that you really didn't have a training book for. We were really inventing the wheel. When you went to Own and E, did you feel like it was more kind of tame and corporate, or were you able to still continue to reinvent as
Yeah,
an
yeah, yeah.
executive? Yeah.
Yeah, I think more so at E, I was sort of able to do that because I don't think E had sort of gotten into that more sophisticated space that MTV was in around advertisers and advertiser integrations and sort of, blending the advertiser DNA with their DNA. I don't think they did it to the extent that we had done it. So they gave me a lot more room to sort of create and have fun with it there. The thing about OWN is OWN was a joint partnership between Oprah Winfrey and Discovery Networks.
Okay.
Since I was the integrated marketing guy, the Discovery Network sales team was in New York. The network was in Los Angeles. Every Wednesday for a couple of years, I flew either to LA or to New York because I had to sort of have a relationship to both worlds, both the sales team and the sales team at Discovery. Again, they're not paying my bills anymore, but they were a lot stodgier. A lot of people thought the sales team, they'd see them coming and it's like, all right, I loved them. The sales team at MTV were creative, smart, cool people. And I think for me, the difference was they just sort of set a higher bar. They never forced us to do shit. They were
Mhm.
understood that, if you bastardized the brand, they had nothing left to sell. So they got it. I think at Discovery, it was a little more staid. And I was also there before the network launched. So I was there for the launch of the network. So we weren't quite into it. Rod Asa, MTV, then he went to NBC Universal. That was sort of my path too. We were always sort of mirroring each other. So I got to work with Rod. He was running programming over it, so that was fun.
And then also with Own, you're kind of also wanting to protect Oprah's brand as well as a look and feel for the network, because everything would come back to her, right? So I'm sure you have to be a little careful.
Well, it's interesting. Did everything come back to her? A lot of people tuned into OWN expecting to see Oprah.
Right.
Right.
Guess who wasn't on OWN? Oprah. Because Oprah was still contractually obligated through her Sony distribution deal and ABC to do the Oprah Winfrey show. So she had a very limited amount of time she was able to spend on it. She wasn't really on air, it wasn't, and I think that was at the very beginning of the network a big challenge because a lot of people were used to tuning into
Expecting
Oprah
it.
and seeing Oprah. And she really wasn't there. I mean, we did a behind the scenes that sort of showed the behind the scenes of the last, sort of Oprah Winfrey network shows, and she was in that. But other than that, she wasn't a big presence on air. So yes, we had to protect the Oprah Winfrey brand, but boy, that Oprah Winfrey brand was huge.
Mm-hmm.
The thing about OWN, I have to tell you that I've never seen so many kitchens in one television network. Every time you turn the corner, there was a kitchen, and everybody was always sending food. There was always pies, food, this, because everyone would be one of Oprah's favorite things. So there was just food
You're like, she
everywhere.
isn't even in the office and you're sending pies.
I'll take that pie.
And it's interesting how OWN has completely sort of rebranded multiple times. I think it's sort of not anything close to what it was going to be when it launched.
It's
I
not.
haven't watched it in a while, but I believe that is the situation.
Yeah, I think the last time I watched OWN is the last time I watched Keeping Up with the Kardashians. So I don't watch any of that anymore.
Was OWN Discovery, Fox, or Warner? Who owns?
It was a joint partnership between Oprah
Okay.
Winfrey and Discovery Networks. They were the money, she was the brand.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Well, this has been
So,
really fun. Perry, we have one kind of closing.
Yeah.
Go for
One
it.
last question for you, Tim.
sure.
So, and you could answer whether it's Los Angeles or New York, but do you have a favorite New York City music venue, either past or present? And what was the best show you ever saw there?
Okay. Well, yes, I definitely do. My favorite New York City venue, I was at a Broadway show once with Bill Briscoe, who ran Irving Plaza, and they went around afterward and they started passing the hat for Broadway Cares. And
Mm-hmm.
he said, we should be doing this at our concert then, at Irving Plaza. I was like, well, that'd be nice. So immediately he started collecting 25 cents a ticket for every ticket ever sold at Irving Plaza to go to
Amazing.
LifeBeat.
I did not know that.
And so it said on the marquee in front, Irving Plaza, the home of LifeBeat. And, it was just a very touching thing they did. And I think I saw a lot of shows there. I think my favorite show ever there was Iggy Pop. He was a maniac. He literally was like climbing on the speakers. He was just out of his mind. He was, and I loved it. I mean, he was just an
Literally.
animal. It was just great. So I loved Iggy Pop there, but I saw a lot of great shows there. One sort of last little note since we started on LifeBeat, and I want to end on LifeBeat. I don't know if we're ending, but I want to end on LifeBeat if we are, because LifeBeat has just become in the last year a program of the Elizabeth Taylor AIDS Foundation.
Mm-hmm.
We sort of all the original board members were like, well, we're going to close it down. We did a lot of outreach through tours and fundraising through tours, and the pandemic came and that all dried up. So we're like, yeah, we probably need to go away. It's probably time to close it. And then I just spoke to the folks over at Elizabeth Taylor, like, we'll take it over. We want to get into the outreach space. So they're running it. They're doing outreach through tours, and they're still doing it because they're like, it's kind of more important than ever that young people get this information. It would be a shame to close it. So LifeBeat lives on through the Elizabeth Taylor AIDS Foundation.
That's amazing, and that's really important too, I think. Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
it.
And it must make you feel good too, because this is something that you gave so much of your life to, especially your early career.
It does. I think I'm finally able to feel good about it. Like we would produce a show or a concert or an event, or like our big snowboarding events out at Big Bear Mountain. We'd do it, and we'd have great talent, and people be like, "Oh, don't you feel good?" I'd be like, "Not really." Like, I never felt good. I never felt good doing it. I never felt good when it was done because I always felt like there was more we should have done, more money we should have raised. It never felt like it was enough. Maybe now I'm starting to look back at it and sort of feel good about it.
We'll hear more about it when you write the book.
When Kathy Flynn writes the book, that's when we'll hear about it.
So, well, thank you, Tim, for taking the time to speak with us. We really,
My
really
pleasure.
appreciate it. I hope that you had a good time. I hope that you enjoyed it. I heard some stories that I had never heard before, so that was eye-opening for me and much appreciated. And for everyone listening, please like, share, review, and rate the podcast so that we can continue to provide episodes for you. And thank you again. We appreciate you all listening.
Thank you guys for doing this and keeping that MTV spirit alive. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Tim, and help us get a
Thank
sponsor.
You. All right, let's see what we can do. Swiffer, maybe Swiffer. How do you feel about that?
Love Swiffer, yeah.
Yeah, all right. Let's see what we can do. All right.
All right. Take care.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Tim.
guys.
Chat soon.
Appreciate your
Bye.
time.